If you've encountered me at the university or somewhere out in the world with social entrepreneurs, you would probably know me as someone who typically speaks about leadership. But mythology is very personal to me. It's deep in what I care about. In fact, it backlights everything that you might hear me addressing. It's that deep archetypal patterning, by which we mean original imprints, the codes, the programs that drive us. So imagine an application engineer. She comes to see you, she's going to show you her new app, but rather than showing you the user interface, she starts describing the code, the programming in the background. That's what mythology is to me. It connects us through all time, across cultures. It's a meaning-making aspect that we share. For me, it's the nexus of literature, psychology, philosophy, and religion. So it brings up deep questions. Is it real? Is it imaginary? Is it true? Is it fiction? These are not new questions. This is not something that we have been grappling with for 2 months, 2 decades, 200 years. It's been with us through all time. One person's truth is another person's fiction. And so we must find a way to communicate with each other and to think about this coding. We share it, and yet we manifest it in unique ways, each of us quite differently. So I think if you're going to learn something about anything, talk to a child, right? This is Sienna Cooper, 8 years old. You really can't tell from looking at the photo. It's a big person, little person. She's 8. And she is the daughter of my friend, colleague, co-founder, Cindy Cooper, and her husband, Clay. Sienna loves mythology. So if you ask her, as I did with an assist from her mom, what's your favorite myth? Her response, Perseus. Now, that was a surprise to me. Not the most common myth. And she's wicked smart. She can tell you details upon details that have more details that spin out of these stories. And I said, why is that your favorite myth? And she said, because horrible things don't happen. Because it doesn't have a bad ending. I think there's great wisdom in that. All of us as innovators for economic, environmental, social impact, we want the redemptive arc of the narrative. We want it to lead towards some greater impact, towards a better outcome. And Sienna understood that in her story. So I'm thinking about what else connects us. We have a couple of examples that are deeply patterned. You see the West Side Story, some of you might remember, which was foreshadowed by Romeo and Juliet, foreshadowed by a story from Ovid's Metamorphoses, 1st century AD, star-crossed love. That's basically the theme. Now, how many of you can relate to star-crossed love? Anyone? Yeah, most of us. It might not be a person. It might be a person. It might be a project as an innovator, as a change maker. It's just not the right time or not the right partners. And so our passion blinds us to the reality of what's occurring. And in the story, as you will recall, bad things happen. We wrongly perceive that the love has died, and so we kill our own love. We kill our own ambition or our own passion. And we can relate to that story. It is told again and again and again through time. Another example, Princess Leia, the epic journey kind of story, right? She was foreshadowed by Ulysses, foreshadowed by Odysseus, about the 6th century BC. The epic journey. Some of you might be high school students and you're looking forward to a gap year. You're going to go to Southeast Asia. You don't know how you'll return, who you will be, but you're embarking on that journey. Maybe you've been working at a nonprofit and you want to launch your own enterprise. Or you've been a corporate person who wants to become a venture capitalist. We take these journeys, and we're not certain where they will take us, but they're wired in that intention, that need to go and explore is wired into us. And what these journeys share, the missions might be different, but they share a requirement for endurance and yes, growth in self-knowledge. How do we come to know ourselves through these journeys? So thinking about us more specifically as innovators, I was looking for the myth that might connect most. And there's the ones that help us really look at solving problems, because we want to solve problems we're solving. I always love it when Angela Jackson mentions that. We want to solve problems we're solving. Also at our university, we want to really encourage self-destiny. So what are the deep archetypes here? They're combined through logos and mythos. If wisdom is the understood experience, again, if wisdom is the understood experience, then that requires a combination of logos and mythos. What do we mean by that? Logos, the logical, linear organization of data, content. And most mythologists, if you spoke to any mythologist, they would give you this same riff. It's one of the things we agree on. Logos and mythos combined. It really gives us a deeper wisdom. So logos, the data. But how do we inform that with our mythos, which is the meaning-making activity that we share as humans? We're wired for stories. We want to create meaning for ourselves and for each other. And so they have to go hand in glove. And the mythos is the generative aspect of the human spirit, where we can reimagine ourselves and continue to dream the myth forward. This is the one that I associate most with innovators or technologists, Prometheus. You see, he's cradling fire. And some of you may know Prometheus as the one who gave fire, stole fire from the gods and gave it to humans. Perhaps the first advance of technology, the democratization of technology, at the very least a populist move. And Prometheus, the god of forethought, Prometheus, always thinking forward, looking toward tomorrow, paired with his brother, Epimetheus, afterthought. We need both. Prometheus saw humans suffering on Earth, living in caves, cold, hungry. He went to Zeus, the CEO god, said, let's share fire. The CEO said, no, that's not for humans. Still, Prometheus persisted, climbed up Mount Olympus, stole a spark from Zeus's thunderbolt, and gave it to humanity. Good thing we have Epimetheus also, because there are inherently consequences to what we do. One could argue that humans are necessarily less resilient as a result of fire. The gift of fire. We're more dependent on it. Just as we are on other technological advances, all of the gadgets that we enjoy. It might not just be technology, but any innovation. We become dependent on those innovations. And as innovators for social, environmental, economic impact, we privilege human-centered design as a modality, by which we mean humans at the center of design. And it's challenging because not all wants and needs are created equally. How do we know where to start? Which problems do we address? And then how do we feed back into our models the impact, the consequences of those decisions? Our ability as humans to anticipate consequences, not to predict outcomes, but to at least anticipate consequences, is the very birthplace of human ethics. Again, our ability to anticipate consequences is the birthplace of all human responsibility. How do we do that together? So how are you, Prometheus? Is there a bold action that you have been avoiding taking? Is there something that you would like to do? A bold action. How do you need Epimetheus to feed the results of your innovations back into the system for some catch and correct moves sometimes? And then you go at it again. How are you, Prometheus? And working with each other to prioritize, it brings up another challenge. We have Hermes, the god of communication, messenger of the gods. So he's kind of rolling across the sky there. Interestingly, Hermes was a trickster. So we're connecting this back to the challenge of Prometheus, the challenge of innovation. How do we link these together? Hermes always made certain that the message was delivered. The god's message always got through, but you weren't entirely certain it was complete or accurate. In that time, there were two types of errors. Type 1 error was to lie or deceive. Type 2 error was to not know when you had been deceived. And I think it's a challenge for us, not a new challenge. How do we listen? Do we hold ourselves responsible for listening deeply and understanding when we've been fooled? Only when we can really look squarely in the face of our own propensity to craft messages can we hold others to a higher standard. So in all communication, in our work together, in innovation, we're both revealing and concealing. All communication requires this. It's not a flaw, it's a feature of communication. We have to choose the words that we use, choose the framework, and it will inevitably, if misheard, misunderstood, lead to an unintended interpretation. It's because it's our meaning-making process is always at work. Let me give an example. A couple of weeks ago, I went to a lecture by Michael Lewis, who was here in town, The Undoing Project. Some of you may have been there. He's giving an example about a new surgical technique that's being introduced to heart surgeons. They were divided into two groups, these doctors. One group of doctors heard the following: if you use this new technique, your patient will have a 90% chance of living for X years, surviving the operation. The other group of doctors was told, if you use this new technique, your patient has a 10% likelihood of dying on the operating table. Which group of physicians was more likely to use the new technique? Clearly the group that heard the 90% story. We can't avoid this, but we can be mindful of what we are choosing. How do we craft things? And when other information is packaged for us, do we hold ourselves accountable for listening deeply, for understanding what is intended, and not allowing ourselves to be led along pathways that have negative impact on others? So how are you, Hermes? Are you a trickster? Is it intended to push the critical thinking of others? It's a gift to them, not malevolent. And how can you make certain that, particularly if you're dealing in platforms, you're developing certain technologies for others, are your algorithms neutral? Are your analytics neutral? Is your interpretation neutral? They never are. But are you mindful of your own bias? What is your implicit bias? We know about the halo effect, the recency effect, endowment. It will continue on this way through time. We have many biases, and are we aware of them? So just think about how each of us has that hermetic quality in us. Well, I want to go now to a metaphor from India, Nepal, Tibet, because some of you are probably wondering, okay, great, interesting, what do I do? I want to be part of this, but I don't know how to enter into this particular conversation or this stream. Great cautionary tale, now what? And there's a three-part metaphor with three different ways, different leadership approaches to how we might engage in this very important work. And the first is king or queen, the sovereign. Some examples. You recognize some of these faces. Oprah Winfrey, Bill Melinda Gates, Warren Buffett, and our own Irving Levin, a local entrepreneur who has given generously to impact entrepreneurs in our efforts. This is the I'm going to show you the way. I will go first. I will lead. I can create value for myself or shareholder value, and then this can be used more broadly. So this is the king or the sovereign kind of approach. The second is the boatman or the ferryman, which is more, let's go together. We're going to go together. And some examples here, Muhammad Yunus, that you might recognize, the 2006 Nobel Peace Prize winner, intending to lift millions out of poverty, established a microcredit revolution, established the Grameen Bank. Let's go together. Amelia, My Street Grocery, one of our alumnus, local food access program. And Micro Mentor, directed by Anita, an entrepreneurial play inside of Mercy Corps, matching mentors with new nonprofits or entrepreneurs. This is the we'll go together kind of approach. Lastly, the shepherd. I'm going to help you go first. I'm going to get behind you and be a part of this story in that way, as evidenced by maybe Malala. Malala is, of course, she was interested in her own education, but she was also passionate about education for all girls, all boys. You go first. Mother Teresa, the Albanian woman, wasn't about eradicating disease. By the time she stooped down in the streets of Calcutta, that changed her life. She could provide comfort. And Central City Concern, some of you work in nonprofits, and some of you are here from Central City Concern as well, again, helping others. Now, interestingly, these overlap. Central City Concern also has Central City Coffee, which is in the Let's Go Together vein. Some of those who were in the sovereign vein, the king, the queen archetype, certainly have become boatmen and ferrymen. So it's not just one or the other, as you see again with our symbol there. The important thing is to remember what Terence said. You probably recognize the quote, but the backstory is Terence was a Roman slave, born in Tunisia, 2nd century BC, owned by a Roman senator, eventually freed. He was a playwright. And he said, I am human. Nothing human is foreign to me. Again, from Carthage in North Africa. Nothing human is foreign to me. If you're capable of it, I'm capable of it, for good or for ill. If you can experience it, this great joy, this success, I could experience that. If you have this pain and suffering, I could have that pain or suffering. Nothing human is foreign to me. So what do we want to do? Can we know ourselves more deeply? The bias with which we approach these gnarly problems. Can we listen deeply and remember to work the results back into our algorithms? Listen deeply and know what is of concern to others, truly. And then are we willing to act boldly? How might we need to steal fire from the gods? What would that look like in our lives? Brene Brown says, we're wired for struggle, but we're worthy of love and belonging. Michael Lewis says, we're wired for fallibility. And there's no shame in that. What Carolyn would say is we're wired for stories. Let's write a shared story worth telling. Indeed, a shared story worth living. Thank you very much.